you ever heard the expression, there's a little bit of genius in all of us? All of us contribute in some small way to societal change. Maybe it's true, maybe even doing something as unspectacular as buying an electric car, or getting a vaccination against a deadly virus, or effecting any random act of kindness is a small act of genius that moves society forward. Maybe the person called the genius is simply the one lucky person upon whom the roulette wheel of fortune or of history just happens to land. Maybe it's all of us, society in general, who is the genius. But if that's true, why do we so often attribute a favorable outcome to a single individual? Maybe, no matter how complex the problem, we just want a simple, singular solution. Equally important, maybe that simple, singular solution is best presented in the form of a compelling human story, the life of Marie Curie or Beethoven or Van Gogh, for example. To pursue this point, let's take two different cases. Case one, in which many people seem to be the genius, and case two, in which only one or two people seem decisive. One or two people cause a new, impactful paradigm to arise that changes society. Case one, who invented the railroad? We've used trains and streetcars for 200 years, but who thought up this idea? When I look on the internet, the first website that comes up offers 5 different names for the inventor of the railroad. Was it the person who invented the steam engine back in the early 19th century? Maybe, going back further, who thought up the blast furnace, which had the capacity to make the modern-day steel, the steel needed for the rails of the railroad? I can't be sure. Then there are so many possible names that we've forgotten them all. Going back even further, who invented the wheel for the railroad? Again, we seem to have forgotten that name, perhaps because the wheel was a collective incremental discovery, many people involved over a long period of time. You get the point. The railroad was an important innovation that we can attribute to society generally. Now, case two, another mode of transportation. Who invented the airplane? Here we are more likely to attribute this innovation to a single person and call that person a genius. In this case, actually a pair, the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur, were the first ones who accomplished, quote, the first sustained and controlled heavier-than-air-powered flight, end quote, in 1903. But what then do we do with Otto Lilienthal, who was already working with hand-powered gliders, as we see in this image of 1895, or Englishman George Cayley, who was doing the same sort of thing in England around 1850. Might we not go all the way back to include Leonardo da Vinci and his designs for a flying machine, a glider? So again, what genius invented the airplane? But in this case, there's a difference. The Wright brothers took a decisive step to contribute two hitherto different things, the glider, the old technology, with the gasoline-powered engine, the new technology. Thereafter, the world was never the same, as the airplane, in many countries, pretty much put the railroad out of business. In this case, a single act, putting an engine on a glider, was transformative, and thus we call the Wright brothers geniuses. Is it the genius of the individual or the genius of the team? Today we think of far-out geniuses, often in terms of technology and space, people such as Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson and Elon Musk. And indeed, they do seem to be individuals who single-handedly take an idea and run with it and build out a company behind them. But genius deniers might rightly ask, what about the vaccine against the COVID-19 virus? Who invented that? Fair enough. To a large degree, that bit of genius appears to be the work of many nameless, faceless scientists working within universities and labs at large corporations, such as Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson. Moderna, when it started to work on its vaccine already had 1,000 employees working on virus vaccines. No single person at Moderna, as far as I know, has stepped forward to take credit for the Moderna vaccine. The genius seems to be all of those workers, each doing his or her little bit as part of a team inside a large corporation. Thus again, it might be asked, with the appearance of collective scientific labs and teams, is the solitary genius a thing of the past? In contrast to the sciences, the arts seem to privilege individual effort. It's often said that, quote, no team could have created one of Beethoven's symphonies. True enough, Beethoven in all ways was a loner and not a good team player. But did Beethoven really do it all by himself? Well, not exactly. Just as painters and architects look at the works of previous painters and architects, and writers read the works of previous writers, so musicians listen to and study the compositions of previous musicians. And back in the day, they literally had to copy one another because that was usually the only way they could get their hands on sheet music. Before the days of mass printing, composers laboriously made their own copies of the works of the masters. Bach copied his forebear Vivaldi. Mozart copied Bach. Beethoven copied Mozart and Haydn. Wagner, in turn, copied Beethoven, and so on. To imply that Beethoven did it all on his own is misleading. The number of movements in a symphony, 4, the tempos and feelings, adagio, for example, the key structure and the formal shape within each movement, all were predetermined, were handed down to Beethoven by the composers of previous generations. Let's leave music and go to the visual arts, to painting. Didn't geniuses such as Monet and Renoir work independently and have their own unique styles? No, for a while, during the 1880s, they worked together. Indeed, can you tell which is the painting by Monet and which is by Renoir? They were both influenced by tradition and influenced by one another. The Renoir is on the right. Surely, if there was ever a painter with an original distinctive style, it was Pablo Picasso. He invented Cubism, right? With this radical painting of 1907, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Well, he did, but at that time, he was in a partnership with his exact contemporary, Georges Braque. Can you tell the Braque from the Picasso? Both painters depicted, as we see here, a guitar done in Cubist style. As Braque said about his collaboration with Picasso at that time, quote, the things Picasso and I said to each other during these years will never be said again. And even if they were, no one would understand them anymore. It was like being two mountain climbers roped together, end quote. Oh, the Picasso painting is on the right. To end this lesson, let's do one last, perhaps thought-provoking comparison. On the left, you see the famous Starry Night of Vincent van Gogh. It is arguably, after the Mona Lisa, the world's most famous painting. I chose it for the cover of my book on genius, and I even have it on my coffee mug. The original is in the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. I think most of us would say that this is a work of genius executed by a genius. But why is Van Gogh's painting considered a work of genius? Is it the painting's impactful originality? Is it the pleasure the painting gives us, we the viewers, perhaps allowing us to re-experience a starry night? Is it the utilitarian benefit the painting provides? At the very least, it covers up what might otherwise be a relentlessly boring wall. Is it the money that people would be willing to pay to own it? Is it a little of all of the above? Now let's consider a Navajo rug that you see on the screen. The Navajos of the southwestern United States are the largest group of indigenous Americans. This rug pattern appeared in the tradition of the Navajos centuries ago. We don't know who first created the pattern, but it was surely a woman because that was the tradition among the Navajos. and the pattern has been replicated in different ways for generations by Navajo women. So we'll call the creator all Navajo women. The rug gives pleasure as we look at it. It has utilitarian value because you can curl up in it and you can sit on it. It has monetary value, but the important thing about this rug is its cultural value. The Van Gogh painting is now a cultural heirloom, but so too is this Navajo rug because it constitutes an important part of the Navajo tradition, part of the Native American cultural heritage. To sum up with a question, is it the solitary artist like Van Gogh, or the duo or partnership like the Wright brothers, or Picasso and Braque? Is it the team or lab at Moderna, or all of society, as with all Navajo women? Which of these is worthy of being honored with the title genius? You decide.